Well, your brother and our dear friend Ani seem to think that I'm tardy. I mean, you know what? If we had a survey go out to all my friends, I don't know what would come back, but whatever.
I can tell you what would come back.
Okay, I think this is something we should actually consider doing. You know, let's like prepare a survey and send them to all of our friends and see what actually does come back.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Like, if you were to imagine if you were to ask your friend, like, say to your friend, this is an anonymous survey. Nothing you say will ever come, like, I'll never know who said what. And you ask people, like, what do you really think?
Yeah, I think we should do it. Let's find out what they really think. What do you think?
Yeah. I think for me, if I was to answer Annie's survey, it would be, why don't you like reggaeton? I don't get it.
Yeah. Why don't you like what?
Reggaeton.
I have no idea what that. No, it sounds like you're hiding behind or underneath lots of coats.
Okay, one sec.
Yeah. All right, somebody's taken one of the coats off. You sounded a bit better there.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Audio.
You're getting there. Yeah, it's still a bit muffled.
How about now?
Slightly better, but you sound distant.
Mm.
I'm so distant.
I was thinking of putting that on your survey.
Give me one sec.
Yeah.
I had to do this on Skype.
Mm. I recently had a challenge like this. Ardman got me a new microphone because he decided that seeing as I'm doing these podcasts on a more regular basis, that I should use a better quality microphone. And so he surprised me. He bought me this wonderful microphone that I can set up, and it's really cool. It's just every now and then it's basically too cool for my laptop. So that's the problem I have.
It was when you and I were talking. Do you remember? It wasn't working.
That was one of the. I think I had just rebooted my laptop, and when that happens, all hell breaks loose, and my laptop seems to reset itself in a completely original way. So every time I reboot it, I have to identify a complete different problem that it's created for me because it doesn't recognize how cool the microphone is. So, and that's all because of Armin. He's so sweet, isn't he?
Right, hold on.
Oh, now
you sound great.
No, that's because it's not connected now. That's why.
Ah, okay. So that's a problem, I guess.
Okay, just give me one sec. Give me 2 minutes, and if it doesn't work, I'll just ditch the headphones.
Okay. Or you could just ditch the headphones and we get started.
All right.
Yeah, it's all right. No, go on, you do it, Annie.
It's fine.
Who's being late?
We've got all night, love. It's not a problem.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, so do you know what? I've actually been, how should I say, somewhat objectively criticized in that I don't actually do proper introductions when I do the podcast, and the unfortunate thing is that's probably going to continue to be the case. But what I would ask is that if you want to throw in some additional introductions about yourselves, absolutely feel free to do so. I mean, I would simply put you down as two management ladies. You're used to how would I say, pushing people around, telling people what to do, getting things organized. Yeah,
I don't think our colleagues would like that very much.
Okay.
It's not too far from the truth, though.
Yeah, but we don't have to tell them that that's what we do. If they assume,
I do it even at home with my housemates. If I were in here, this place would be an absolute S show.
Okay, but I mean, are they going to listen to this podcast?
Probably
they
not.
might.
And also, they know it, so it's there's no denying it or hiding it, so it's fine.
Okay, fair enough. But why would they not listen to the podcast, Tatiana? Do you not advertise your efforts when you do them?
No, Annie said that, not me.
Annie.
What effort?
Okay. Oh, you speaking to me is an effort sometimes, isn't it? I mean,
No, that's always a pleasure.
hey,
Yay.
I don't have the drum roll thingy going, but
No, but I've got to admit, I've been a bit sheepish about sharing, but that's because it's more about me being self-conscious rather than, not wanting to share your podcast. If
no,
that
but
makes
that's cool though, isn't it? I mean, because when we talk, I also get asked some questions, which I want that to continue basically, because I can't just talk about randomly about myself, and yeah, quite often the questions are quite deep, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it. And it's cool though sharing stuff about yourself. I mean, you don't have to, share your absolute innermost, And from a book that I was reading recently, that one of the detectives in the story said, everybody has a secret room, and nobody ever wants to let anybody into that room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fair enough. I think those secret rooms should remain closed, at least for as long as people want them to remain closed. But before you get to that secret room, which is always at the back of your psyche, there are many other levels and other rooms to traverse through before reaching that room. And so, therefore, talking about ourselves in many ways brings us closer to these others, because they probably think these things too. Don't you find?
Yeah. I think so. I think so. I mean, I understand where Annie's coming from about being self-conscious though. Because it's kind of like, yeah, you're sort of sharing this out, and people are going to be like, I don't know, I guess, I don't know.
No, I mean, it wasn't so much about being self-conscious about sharing like my innermost thoughts. But I don't know. I guess there were like certain things that I would have maybe said differently, or if I had thought through it a bit more. I don't know. I'll get over it. I'm sure one day I'll be like, yeah, you know what? You should be listening to this anyway.
Absolutely.
That's because you need to listen to me. Hey.
But I mean, do you not find a certain liberty in, not necessarily revealing everything, not necessarily telling everybody the truth. You don't have to tell people how you feel about them if it's not positive, shall we say. It's also good to be constructively critical. But if we show that of ourselves, we can reflect. Does that not suggest a certain level of maturity that we have finally developed about ourselves?
To be honest, I'm actually a firm believer of that, but more in terms of how we talk to our friends, or basically, I had a friend recently who came to me with a problem, something that had happened to her that wasn't great. And I think a couple of other friends that she had spoken to basically were obviously super supportive of her, but being very defensive of her, being very kind of maybe attacking the people who wronged her. And although I agreed with that, I think my approach was to be actually, let's be a bit more realistic about this and be more objective about it, and actually said what I thought and where I thought the others were wrong, but also where I thought that maybe she might have been wrong. And it wasn't an easy conversation to have at that point, but like later on she then got back to me and was like, thanks for being honest and saying what you thought. It actually made me think a lot about it and maybe approach that problem in a slightly different way. And I don't know, I think it's more, it benefits everyone at that point if you're being constructive rather than not, I think.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, and especially I think the easiest thing to do or to say when somebody asks you for advice or an opinion, say, "Oh, you look great. Oh, it's brilliant. Oh, it's a great thing to do." But what that shows is you haven't actually thought about it. You're simply giving them the kind of answer that you believe they would like to hear.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Whereas if you take time to be a bit more analytical and on occasions critical, even if it's perhaps more difficult for them to stomach, it's as in the case of your friend who reflected apparently and came back to you with an appreciative response, it is more beneficial in the long run Tatiana, are you the kind of person who takes constructive criticism on the nose?
Do you know what? I am, but it depends where it's coming from.
Okay, so it's more the subject rather than the object with you.
No, it's more of the person. Yeah.
Or the person it's coming from.
Yeah. So it's who rather than what. And yeah, like I won't. I'm not going to give names, but for example, I'd done something recently because I'm quite self-conscious. I don't really like watching or listening to myself, even though I do a lot of like events where I moderate. So I am, of course, I take feedback. Offering feedback to people is good because it helps you develop, but I think it also depends on who's giving it to you.
I guess it depends on how much you trust or respect the opinion of that other person. If it's someone who like, actually, I don't think you have a say or have the authority to speak on this matter in a way, then you're like, actually, I might take that with a pinch of salt.
And what about a third option where, for example, you are presented with somebody talks about their problems, their issues and so on, and they don't actually want advice. They don't want a response of any sort. They just want somebody to talk to. Can you see circumstances under where for you that would also be the best option? Just listen. Don't tell me what you think. Don't give me solutions. Just be supportive. Listen.
100%, but also I think more often than not, it's just by talking and by actually venting or expressing their thoughts or their opinions or what's happening at that point, they actually come up with the solution themselves. It's just like having a sounding board and having someone to talk to and someone who can actually listen, and finding people who can actually listen and not be thinking about what they want to say next is actually not that hard to find, and it's really nice when you do.
Yeah, I have to say, so many times I've seen people waiting for that opportunity to jump in, and they're not listening to others. And I do find it strange because nowadays, whenever you read advice for people who tell you how best to communicate, and I also have learned this as well. It's a lot of advice is listen to what people are saying, use your senses. See and listen. But so few of us can still do this properly.
I agree.
Yeah, that's true. We don't. I mean, well, I don't know. I think I think again it goes back to what Ani said though, that it depends on the individual who is talking. Like I know it sounds awful, but you will listen to certain people and then you will not listen to others.
Mm-hmm.
And that is purely down to, I think, it is like, do you respect that person's opinion? Do you what they say? Like, and I mean, it's a very, this is a very tough sort of, area of discussion, because I think it also comes down to things like, for example, even in a professional environment, if you don't think that person knows what they're talking about, then you're just not going to take their advice, and you'll go elsewhere for advice because you'll say, okay, thank you, and then you'll just move on because you're just like, this isn't actually what I needed. Or you're questioning them, and if you're questioning people, I mean, it's really hard, but I think again it comes down to whether you think that the other person has any authority on the topic, generally speaking.
Yeah, I'm often reminded when I think about these kinds of situations, and what you just said there as well, Tatiana. Do you remember? Have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one? When the guy who he's looking for the Star-Lord, the one who rescued him. He always says, "I rescued you and I stopped the crew from eating you." I can't remember the guy's name, but he asks somebody what happened and where they went. And whenever this person responds, because he doesn't like what he's being told, he just starts, what did you? And I think to myself, if somebody starts talking to you and you thought this person's chatting shit, would you be able to just stand there in that person's face and say, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? Because I just find that so amusing, and I have sometimes actually imagined doing that when somebody's talking. Is that rude? Is that bad?
I do in my head.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But then isn't it hard to stop yourself from laughing? I tell you, a couple of times I've come so close to just bursting out laughing, and it's a bad thing to do. It's a bad look.
Do you know what? This is called self-discipline and and learning as you get older. Like you know what? I mean, we're not having human interactions at the moment. It's all on social. But I'll give you an example of something I wanted to do. Like I was told about this Netflix documentary that's come out that everybody's watching at the moment called Seaspiracy, and it's full of so much pseudo crap that I can't even begin to sort of just like it's like. Academics and NGOs have even debunked it as like the ridiculous. Anyway, and it's really funny because I've seen some supposed activists, and by the way, there's a lot of them these days. They're not actual. They're what we would once upon a time call pseudo intellectuals. They're people that always have a cause but don't really understand the causes, but jump on the bandwagon but haven't really investigated the issues to fully understand what is going on, what's being said. And really like understanding the science of some of these things. So anyway, I saw that like a few people have started sharing this and going like, this is really good. Like people need to watch this without any background on how true this is. And it's quite sad, A, because the world now relies on Netflix to inform them about the world and then takes that as at face value as truth. But B, I was tempted to write something and I thought, why bother? Like, you're just going to end up in a debate scenario with this person where you're trying to explain to them the practicalities or the realities of the sector to somebody who doesn't really understand it. And you've wasted your time because the likelihood is nothing will come out of it. So in a kind of like, if this was face to face and you were trying to have this discussion and that person went on a 10-minute monologue about why this documentary is true and real and the facts are the facts presented or supposed facts are presented are true, in your mind you would want to sort of shut them down, but nowadays you just sort of in your mind say what a moron, but let them talk and then just change the subject, because what else are you going to do? Argue with someone who doesn't want to actually learn a different point of view?
I guess it really depends on, and I think you, Tatiana, like have found yourself in that situation quite a lot. Like I'm just thinking on like Facebook, for example, like, just posting someone or commenting on someone that's something that someone else said that you disagreed with. And then, there ensued like a 2-day long debate in the comments. But I think it's one of those where it depends on how much you care about not necessarily the point, but like what that other person thinks. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's worth engaging in that debate if you're like, actually, you're like, yeah, I mean, I care about what you're saying and what your opinion is, and I want to have this debate with you. But sometimes it's like, someone you haven't seen like 15 years and you're like, I really don't care what, I really don't want to be actually wasting my time trying to get into this conversation right now.
Yeah.
It's, it's choosing how you spend your time and what's actually valuable, what you get out of it, I guess.
I just want to say, I wish I had that determination about me when I was younger, in some of the relationships I had when I was younger back in London, because I mean, one of the most shining examples would be at New Year's Eve, at the New Year's Eve ball, and like people used to grab everybody, whoever, give them a big hug and a kiss to say Happy New Year. Oh man, I haven't seen you in such a long time, and blah blah blah, and then you wouldn't see them again until midnight the next year. And it was just such a random event. At some point, I decided that I was going to spend midnight in the toilet, and that's essentially what I did until it went one step further and decided to return home and just spend New Year's with my family, because that was just the most entertaining after all. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of these random people, and is it the case, do you think, that now, because of the circumstances under which we live, we've become a bit more protective of our time, and so therefore we want to use it more effectively? Or is that an age-related thing?
Probably both.
I think, yeah, probably. No, I think when you're younger, you're you're a bit more relaxed. Look, when you're younger, time is not necessarily it feels infinite, right? Everything just, you don't really think about these things, and you don't mind wasting your time, or you're not unaware of these things, by the way, when you're younger. It's not like you come to this epiphany when in your 30s, but I think you're more tolerant of different things. I think it's as you get older and your time becomes more limited and your capacity to deal with bullshit becomes less and less, because you're like, I'm done with this. That's why you went into the bathrooms to hide, because at some point you were like, okay, I'm done with this.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I was more of a firebrand then than I am now. Just to say, but yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. No. I was going to say that can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, yeah, you're more protective of your time and making sure that you spend that time with valued people, or doing things that you like, or listening to certain opinions. But I guess the other side of that coin is that you become then potentially, some people do become less exposed to different opinions and contradictory opinions, and then become very tunnel vision, and end up being just like very single-mindedly and slightly narrow-minded in their views, and not so open. So I guess the challenge there is being making the most of your time, and and the things that you like doing, etc., but not being as bullheaded as to kind of close off to any kind of new stimulus and the things that happen around you. I think it happens a lot in like political views. You see like people who when they're younger have a far more potentially either lefty or maybe a more social or more kind of liberal kind of viewpoint, but as they grow older, all of a sudden their voting kind of history changes quite significantly and become more conservative,
depending on their wage packet.
Guys, you reminded me of, I'll very quickly say this, that there was years ago, and I cannot for the life of me remember the film's name, so, you're just not going to have to, whatever. But basically, I watched this film. It was a Danish film, and it's about a bunch of kids who kidnap this really wealthy man, and they take him to some place in the countryside, and they're sort of like they're demonstrating against something or another, and they start to talk to this man, and he's very chilled out and so on, despite being this really wealthy businessman. And as they get to know him, they find out that he was once upon a time just like them, like this rebel without a cause, going around demonstrating, protesting. And he says, like, I got older, I had a family, and my values changed, and what was important to me changed. So people do change, and I think that that's not a negative thing, but it depends on how you change and how you use that, what you're learning in the process. But political affiliation, going from left to right, shouldn't be seen, and this is something that maybe we can talk about another day, but I don't think, like, there's a stigma now about not necessarily being a lefty or left-leaning, and that's quite dangerous, because I read a really good article in Forbes about this, and we're moving into this McCarthyism era, but just in reverse. And I found it very interesting, because I do think it's real. Suddenly you're disliked for your political affiliations, even though it might just be the economics of it. You just prefer right-leaning economic policies. It has something to do with immigration policies.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean it in a kind
of
I know. Judgmental way, but more in terms of both economically and like socially. There is, I'm just speaking of like parents of friends, if you like, and just it feels like it does happen quite a lot, that kind of becoming more conservative than, like, politically speaking, than you were as a younger person. As you grow old, seems to be, it happen quite a lot. I just find it interesting as a trend.
I also find it interesting that Forbes, which I don't read too often, I have to admit, but identifying a reason why it's okay to be critical of the left, I find that an amusing article. I find there's a lot of misinformation out there, and this apparent surge of left-wing, not extremism, but this sort of left-wing and liberal idealism. I can't see it in any way setting the agenda. I tend to find people who are left-wing liberals as the ones who are more likely to say, okay, of course they're allowed to have their say. But it's only when, as the Armenians say, the knife hits the bone that these people actually come out. But yeah, and maybe Tatiana, you're right. I think we should come back and have a talk about this, because I do find it interesting to be able to analyze the correlation between age and political identity.
Mm-hmm. But we are varying. I mean, just very quickly on this, I always go back to this one example. Annie, was at your house party. I met this girl. She was very cool. And we were talking, and then she sort of said, I can't remember what happened, but she said something about like, let's all socialists rise. And I turned around and I said, well, I was like, I'm a conservative. And she goes, what? She goes, I don't think I can be your friend, and walked away. I was like, okay, is that what we base friendships on these days? No, I hope not. I mean, if we really come down to, identity politics into what determines our friendships, my God, I'd have very little friends. I don't value friendship based on obviously, nothing extreme, but these days being a conservative is I'm not a conservative anymore, but I just find it strange. I don't think it's anyone's business who you vote for and what you support. Of course, unless it's anything extreme, let's caveat that. But generally speaking, I just don't think that's, this shouldn't be happening in our generation. Like, this is not something that should be happening in the 21st century.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry, Ani, if you were about to come in and say anything there, please, feel free to jump in.
I wasn't, go for it.
Okay, I was just going to say that sometimes when I read older material and I think to myself, wow, God, they used to think in such an advanced fashion 100 years ago, and then I tend to think to myself, actually, there's obviously there were technological differences back then and limitations, but they weren't limited ideologically. I think that in some ways people were a bit more open-minded, a bit more accepting in those days about politics and so on. I think that with the onset of the internet, we haven't necessarily opened up our minds to new ideas. What we have seen, though, is powerful campaigning from specific areas of the political spectrum, which have now found new ways of attracting support. And that leads itself into the tunnel vision that you've both indicated. And I find that unfortunate. These echo chambers now are so successfully, created online. It's almost impossible to escape them for some people.
But that's in a way how I remember, like during the Brexit referendum, in a way why, I would on my feed, for example, I would only ever see, or at least like 99% of it would be actually people who thought the same way I did. And I think that happened to a lot of people. And then, when we saw the result on whatever day it was, everyone was a bit like, I'm sorry, how did that happen exactly? If everyone I know, everyone in my extended circle was against it. But then obviously that's the thing. Effectively, you end up seeing only what your feed feeds you, and which is basically perpetuating the echo chamber.
Yeah. I mean, I voted Remain, and I had a feeling it would be close. I was shocked though in the morning when I woke up. But then when I saw the election result in, I think it was 2019, wasn't it, when Boris Johnson was elected with this huge majority? For me, that's when the argument of Brexit died. For me, there's no more an argument as to whether or not it should be had. This generation has been quite clear. And in 20 years' time, we'll see what happens. But for me now, it's a dead argument, unfortunately. But yeah, okay. We actually wanted to have this debate a few weeks ago because it was at the time of the International Women's Day, and a lot of items had been had been topical, should we say, at the time. There was Meghan, and then there was the death of this young lady, Sarah, was it?
Yeah, Sarah Everard.
Yeah. And then there was the demonstration, and then the police exhibited this sort of hard line towards the demonstrants, and then the report into the behavior of the police with regards to the demonstration came out, and it said that it was perfectly in line with what they were supposed to be doing. As I'm in Berlin, I have no idea what the mood is currently in London and the UK. Have things cooled down now? Because it seems to have been removed from the media somewhat, what's happened with Sarah Everard.
The topic, I mean, the indignation has definitely sort of died down since then. I don't know, Annie, what you think.
I think people have moved on a little. I mean, it's that kind of classic. It just happened to happen all during that week. And, there was all this kind of thing like, this is what we thought. And we spoke about women on Monday. This is what happened on Tuesday. It was within a span of like 7 days. So much happened, and it became like incredibly top of mind and relevant. But it's just, give it like 2 weeks later, no one's really talking about it anymore.
But that's poor form, isn't it? I mean, because we're not talking about simply one murder, and it's horrible, and I can only imagine what her poor family must be going through. But we're not talking about the death of one person. We are talking about an entire gender which has consistently been dominated or manipulated, pushed to the side in some ways, marginalized, presented with a very small carrot, and the large sort of a bunch of carrots has been thrown over to feed the men. This should have been an opportunity for a real movement, something, because there was, was it Reclaim Our Streets? There was something there, but then it died down. I don't understand that.
I think that I think that there's a lot more. I still have a lot of questions about that story than I have any answers, right? And I don't think that anyone's done any proper follow up on the stories, on the story itself. Also now there's a lot going on in the UK with the proposed new protest bill. You've got the Astra scandal. I feel like the people have limited capacity to absorb information at the moment. But really, I mean, on a side note, yesterday I met up with some friends of mine in a park, and I hadn't seen one of them in a very, very long time. So anyway, we met up, and one of them was waiting for the other two because my friend and I were running late, and then she comes in.
What? You were running late?
You see, I know, hard to believe with me. So anyway, she was like, she's like, I was in the park, and it was like after 6:30, so she was a little bit conscious about it. And then she said, she wanted to sit somewhere where there was a bit of light. And I said, well, we're in a park and you're not going to find any light. But we went somewhere where it was a little bit more open space and near the entrance. And we sat there. It was nice. But then the girls would refuse to. I said, well, I'll walk you to Baker Street and then I'll walk through the park home. And they were like, no. We'll walk with you to the exit that you need. And then we'll go home. And we talked about Sarah, and we talked about, sexual harassment, and I've been having ongoing conversations one-to-ones, but in terms of the media, I haven't seen much discussion since the sort of the frenzy that took place a couple of weeks ago. But between friends, I'm regularly having these kinds of conversations, and just, we're sort of asking each other questions, or talking about the statistics and so on.
I agree. I guess it's the kind of usual kind of media news cycle, right? So, it was a story during that period of time, and then something else came along, and then we focused on that from a mass media point of view. But yeah, I agree. I've been having a lot of conversations around that as well, but almost in terms of certain things that I hadn't necessarily thought about, and things that I do and I have always done or not done, in terms of, walking home alone, or people maybe like waiting for me to get a cab before I get into it, and things like that, and almost trying to understand in terms of how much of that behavior, where all of that came from. And I don't know, I've been having a lot of conversations around that, around how we individually behave as women, and whether we do feel that threat or don't feel that threat. Yeah, I agree with you, Tat. Like on a one-on-one, I think it's definitely still there.
Mm.
But I mean, how do you think it would be possible to get some kind of a campaign materialize where, Kamala Harris made a fantastic point when, a few weeks ago, when they asked her a question about, the president coming out with an executive order with regards to gun control, and she responded and said, well, the question really is, do you want a short-term solution or a long-term solution? Because if you want a long-term solution, then you need the legislation. And I think she put out a fantastic rebuke there to the journalist who was asking the question. Should there not be some kind of legislation introduced in the UK with regards to gender equality? Because at some point, enough is enough, surely.
But look, I don't, in the case of America and gun violence, I don't disagree with Kamala Harris, because executive orders are only as good as the president that's in power. As we saw when Obama left, when Trump took over, and now that Biden has come in, and what he's done since, within like the first less than 100 days of being in office. The legislation goes so far. We have fantastic labor laws in the UK, right? But people find loopholes and ways of still discriminating against pregnant working women, or women that come back from maternity leave, or not necessarily offering equal pay and saying we're in the process of it, we're working towards it. There's always a way of working around it. It's got to come. Education is also required. Legislation alone will not work. Legislation sometimes actually can have a negative impact, especially on an issue like gender equality, where people can't even agree on the fact that there isn't equality, right? The amount of men I speak to that do not think that there's an issue with equality, and also women, by the way, sorry, let me caveat this. And then, I don't remember, Sako, if this was when we spoke, but I had I went on this social media tirade, a few weeks after that, and there was this one thing that when I posted about the Guardian's 97% of young women in the UK say that they've been sexually harassed, and then this one guy took my story and reposted it and said, I don't believe this, do you? And this is after he and I had an entire conversation about this, and I explained to him what sexual harassment meant. So I then replied to him and I said, can I take your story and use it for myself? And I did, and I called him out, and I was like, men dictating what women feel is sexual harassment or not. We can't even, if people are even questioning the experiences of women, or it's in this case young girls, then legislation is not going to work, because in the UK we have good legislation already. We could do better, of course, but yeah.
Ani, have you had any similar experiences with some of the guys that you've talked to?
To be honest, again, I wouldn't say that from my male friends or people I interact with would necessarily say no, there isn't equality, that there isn't an issue. I would say that actually, at least from the people I interact with, they do tend to be fully aware of it. And I don't know, it's not a conversation that has ever caused an issue or controversy, or I've never actually faced someone who said to me, no, that's just bullshit, there isn't such a thing. I don't know if it's because my circle is a bit more kind of smaller than Tats, but everyone has always kind of been quite, I mean, there is clearly a lot that can be done. And Tat, I agree with what you're saying in terms of it's not so much from a legislation point of view. I think the crux of the issue is moving forward from an education point of view and making sure that, people grow up with, certain values and certain understanding of what is, how to behave and what constitutes harassment or not harassment, and what can be, seen as being an undervaluing comment or not, for example.
Yeah.
The problem that I have with it is with education is we're then throwing it off onto the next generation. And I recently read an article about gender equality in Japan. And it's the bottom rated country in the G7. I think it's something like 120th when it comes to gender equality. And one of the university professors who had been interviewed for this article, she said, so I'm hoping for generational change. I think that a lot of younger Japanese men do not look at women in this way and do consider women to be their equals in the workplace and in society. These are men who would have no problems at all in taking orders from a female boss. I would argue that all we need to do is be patient and wait for the older men to depart. Yeah. And so,
I mean,
what do you think about that?
She's got a point.
But how long are you willing to wait? As in,
well, can I? You know what? She has a. I mean, what she says is valid. But here's the thing: if that man is raising another, and this is to your point, Ani, when we were talking about education, was it's a mixture, it's a combination. Because look, if you go to school and your school tells you, we treat everybody equally, no matter what their ethnicity is, no matter what their sexuality is, or their gender, but then you go home to a father who does not believe any of that stuff and goes, oh, I can't believe they're teaching you that liberal crap in school. Oh my God, I can't, I should move you to another school, right? By the way, I'm pretending like this is a conversation that happens in a family home. But if that kind of conversation is happening at home, that child starts to question what they're learning in the school. So it's a two-pronged approach. You got to have a family that also follows or shares similar values. And so that would work. But if that man is educating 5 children in the process, and then they pick up, or at least one of them picks up his way of thinking, then you're still in a loop. I don't know. But the thing is, like, making things illegal does not solve the problem. All that does is it just buries the issue. It doesn't solve the problem.
But legislation isn't only there to make things illegal. Legislation is also there to create things. Yeah. It can create a platform of laws, but on the other hand, it can also create a center of advice, a place where institutions can go to seek solutions, a place where any gender that feels itself to have been in some way ridiculed, disrespected, or discriminated against can go to seek support. As in, legislation does also have a creative element we sometimes perhaps overlook.
I think as everything, there's a combination of factors, right? I think you need to think about the long term, but you need to think about short-term solutions as well. It's a combination of those. And yes, I agree that there's definitely legislations that can be approved. And I'm thinking, for example, specifically, and I do not remember the super details, but this gang rape case in Spain that basically shook the
these British holidaymakers, wasn't it?
No. This was during the bull run that happens in Pamplona in July every year. And it was a bunch, I think it was like 5 guys from Andalusia, from the south, who had been there and basically gang raped an 18-year-old girl. And the whole thing was that something along the lines of, in the Spanish law, if the girl doesn't show, or she doesn't actually physically fight against it, it's not considered rape.
Oh, wow.
Along those lines. But obviously, I mean, we're talking about an 18-year-old girl who was drunk and facing 5 guys who are older than her. She probably, it's one of those like, well, what am I going to do against this? There's no chance in hell that I will be able to get myself out of this one. So, it's that kind of, I think there's things like that legislation can do. And again, this is an extreme case, but as an example, there's definitely things that legislation can do in terms of ensuring that things like this have the proper consequence. These guys were acquitted initially, and then I think there was an appeal, and I think it went back into court. But it's things like this that if you're basically telling people that go ahead, nothing's going to happen to you if oh yeah, it was just one night I went, I slightly lost my control and went a bit too far. That's not acceptable. But what this kind of the current state of the law, that is basically giving you that permissibility. It's giving them kind of, it doesn't really matter if you go a bit too far, whereas that's not right.
To put this into context, Spain only implemented legislation against violence against women, like and domestic violence. I think it was 2000. Was it 2005, Ani, or 2006? And it was following the murder of a woman.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Look, I don't look. I'll give. Let's maybe imagine it's a company, right? And you have an HR, and HR says this is your HR policy handbook, and if someone bullies you, come to us, or if this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. Now, all of this in practical terms works until the person bullying you is somebody that is of influence, and then suddenly it becomes is this really true? Okay, we'll have to alert them about this, and or things are said that starts to make the other person second guess, should I be reporting them? Should I not be reporting them? And then one of the first things that they'll always say to you is, you should speak to them first, right? Now, in a legal situation, you report something 9 out of 10 times, especially if it's something very minor, like a guy grabs your ass on the tube, which, by the way, you're technically allowed to report, but if you did, nothing's going to happen about it. So you say, why bother? Yeah. And it's a similar situation. You go through the process. You know that there's a structure there. You know that there's people that can support you, but it depends on the situation. It depends where you are, which city you're in, because some cities do it better than others. Like, there's a whole bunch of factors that come into this. And so I do go back to, we need to do better. We need to teach better. We need to talk to each other better. I don't agree with things like, I think I've said this in the past, like girls being awful in front of guys about other girls and talking about them in a way that guys think, oh, I can talk about them like this too. We're as much to blame, by the way. I'm not putting all of this on men. We're as much to blame as men are about about the level of inequality.
I wouldn't go as far as saying, we're just as much to blame. Because we can be catty about each other. I completely agree with that, but I don't think that necessarily, should imply that, or gives license to guys to behave in any way, differently because of.
Okay.
I don't think that's right.
I think it's perhaps fair to say that in many cases, a lot of the online abuse that women face is received from a fair distribution with regards to gender. I think a large number of women are just as abusive to other women online as you'd probably find men are. And I think there are statistics to actually say that the majority of online abuse that women face comes from other women, at least with regards to famous women. Mm-hmm. But on the debate as to whether or not where responsibility lies, I would have to go with Ani on this, because I think that in the case of inequality, it's I find it difficult to have a double punishment for the victim. In this case, women largely who are who find themselves unfortunately on the end of having a smaller wage packet, on being perhaps asked to do jobs that they don't really want to do because they're pregnant and that wasn't part of the management plan, and so therefore, sorry, we don't have any nice positions for you. Can you perhaps work in the mailroom? These are kinds of things that shouldn't happen. I just don't think.
But I'm actually the way I'm talking about it was a little bit differently. Like sometimes in the workplace you'll find that it's other women who prevent other women from moving up, right? If you're, and I'm not saying this always happens, but in my own experience, for example, I have found men to be my male bosses to have helped me excel more so than my female bosses. And in the case of, and I'll give you another example of like a societal situation in Iran, the women observe the laws far more religiously, especially the older women, than the men themselves. When we were there for my grandmother's funeral, my sister walked into one of the museums and she was wearing this kaftan, but it was see-through. But we've been touring around the city the whole day with our tour guide. And the guy didn't say anything to my sister. So she was about to walk in and this woman runs down, starts screaming. And she freaked my sister out. And we looked at the tour guide. We're like, what's the problem? And then he goes, it's the way she's dressed. She says, like, they're going to have her, arrested or whatever if she doesn't like get her like put on some proper attire. And the woman started screaming at the men, like telling them off for not picking up on this. And similarly, when I was at the airport, I had my hair out of my scarf and this woman came up and was like yelling at me in Farsi. And I'm like, I don't speak Farsi. But none of the men were sort of telling me off. So I just found it really interesting that, in that society, it's the women that are enforcing the restrictions rather than the men, although the men support it.
But it's also interesting when you say that some women have been perhaps preventive when it comes to allowing your career to develop, or other women as well. Is this a case of, for example, I had to fight for my position and I'm not going to let them simply get promoted? Do you think there's this element of envy perhaps in some older generations? Because generally speaking, from what I've read and listened to, women who have pushed their way through the glass ceiling feel proud because they've created a path for the others.
I think it really depends on experience and what you went through. So I give a very short example. I did a talk with a group of women in politics, and it was talking about their experiences. And one of them was a lawyer, and she talked about how when she was, she was reporting to women who had been lawyers, young lawyers struggling in the 70s and 80s, female lawyers trying to make them a name for themselves and get the respect that they deserve. And she said that she found what she found really interesting is that these women gave her a lot of grief when she became pregnant and needed time off and so on, because they were mad about the fact that they had to fight so hard during their time and that they felt that she got it so easy. And, like something like that for me is crazy because, as you say, you fought for it so that the next generation could enjoy it. But then you were upset, or maybe, you see someone and you think like that person's after my job. So you act in a way that, you start to, maybe you don't realize what you're doing, but you're actually hindering the other person. And it doesn't make for a good culture or a good environment in the office. So yeah, I'm not saying, but I do think though, that is also a management problem, because if you as an individual don't feel secure in your job, you will no doubt not encourage or help others around you, and that comes from the way that you're managed as well, like who's managing you and how they're managing you and what kind of level of confidence that they're giving you.
Do you think there's also like a certain element of competition in terms of, there's or the perception that there's only so many women that will be promoted or will be at that level of seniority, and if you're at the same level as another woman, that there's only one of the two will actually get there, as opposed to that basically the gender factor is part of the decision making as to that person is going to be promoted or not. The perception, there's a funnel to a degree as to both of us won't make it.
No, but you see, again, I think that for me means that you've got a leadership that lacks creativity and undervalues employees. Because if you're, let's say in a scenario, Ani, you're my boss, right? And I'm telling you that I want to be promoted, and you don't want to do that, and that's probably because you have a flat structure in the organization and you don't really know how to promote me, and in that environment you think it's me or her, right? So you'll take credit for my projects, you'll put yourself out there versus me because you want to safeguard your job. But I would say again, like, that's a management issue, because management isn't offering the right opportunities. Why should I take your job? If you're obviously good at what you do, I should be offered something different if they want to keep me and keep you.
No, I completely agree. But what I'm wondering is whether there might be that perception reason, as a reason why some women may be more aggressive towards other women in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think it'll depend from industry to industry. Like, it's not, for example, it's not something I've come across. On the contrary, I think there's actually more and more women in my industry and in more kind of managerial positions, even more so sometimes than men. But I just was wondering whether you thought that was one of the, a potential reason for that kind of competition or aggressivity.
I think so, but I still believe that if you have the right company culture, you can nip these. You can change this, right? And so I'm not actually, maybe I'm kind of going back on myself. I don't know what I'm saying here, but I would say that maybe it's the culture that encourages people to behave that they do. But so then I'll defer back to my original point, which was giving people the right education and helping people understand. Helping people understand, like, what kind of environment that you create determines the behavior of people.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Regardless of gender.
Yeah, I find it thrilling. I mean, I really enjoy listening to the way that you debate the point. Do you think that there is perhaps a time ahead of us that the quota that a lot of governments have set for establishing numbers of women on boards or in senior management, can you foresee a time where that quota may actually work against women, in a sense that, we've hit our quota now, that's it, guys?
Yeah. I've always had mixed feelings about quotas, in that in an ideal world, and I don't know whether this is idealistic or not, it's like it shouldn't matter. Like, it should be, regardless of whether this person is, you shouldn't be hiring someone just because she is a woman, just because it's a man, if their skills aren't up to scratch, and just to fill in a quota. I think, in an ideal world, you should be valuing the candidates who've gone in front of you for their skill set, for what they bring to the company, etc., regardless of whether they're male or female. So I do think that quotas can be hindering in that sense, that you're not necessarily hiring the right person for that role just because you have to kind of meet a quota. I don't know. I think it potentially depends on how far along in that process you are as well. I think, potentially maybe in early days, in a very kind of male heavy kind of situation, they can help to almost like force a situation. But I think it gets to a point where it could actually become a problem rather than helping.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that I have is that in an ideal world, we wouldn't need a quota, because there would already be a fair number of women on boards and in senior management. I always feel that the social change, when it comes, is always most difficult for the first generation. And then the generation that follows just simply picks up and carries it forward because that's all they've ever experienced. So, if having the quota means that, right now you're going to have people in a position of power who perhaps were not the best candidate, that's okay, as long as the next generation of female board member is going to be absolutely top dog, because she never had to fight against discrimination to get into that position. She didn't have to fight against a school system where the boys were favored to learn mathematics and science, whereas she had to go through sewing, for example. And so therefore you may be in some ways sacrificing the short term for the longer term, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, possibly. But then again, I was having this conversation with the HR person where I'm working at the moment, and because we basically just had a diversity training, and one of the conversations I was having with her is that basically she was considering whether in recruiting processes, whether the names of the candidates should be hidden. Basically, so not only from a gender point of view, but almost like even like from a racial, ethnic point of view. And I think this comes back to, I think there was a study in the States where basically names that were more obviously of African American origin were less likely to be picked in an initial shortlist than more white sounding names, for example. And there was we were having this conversation as to whether that should be something that should be removed from CVs, and then at that point you're basically literally just judging from what's on, from literally based on your experience, regardless of whether you're a woman or a man or where you come from. So that's almost like pushing that point to the other extreme. So there's no quotas, there's literally from pure skill set. Don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, though, that may be the case with regards to recruiting, but if women are discouraged from getting a technology degree, then they're not even going to be able to put that on their CV. So as in, if this process may be okay to start with, perhaps once we have overcome this initial gender inequalities stage that we've already got before us. Because, I mean, quotas, this idea of quotas was introduced in the 90s. Yeah, and we still sit on a statistic that says not more than, 7-8% of women are on boards. As in, the quota system, it's not doing it quickly enough. We should already have gone beyond this stage.
Yeah. So, I'd ask you also, is it ethical? Would you argue that it's ethical? And I say this because actually it's something that I used as a case study for a class that I was teaching for Ecuadorian women. And I said to them, is it are quotas ethical? And all of them said, yes, it is. And I said, okay, and if you were a man, how would you feel about it? And they all went very quiet and they said, yeah, you know what? We see your point. Quotas can only work if they're done in a certain type of way, right? And and you have full transparency about, let's say in the workplace environment, the hiring process, and how that decision is being made. Because what tends to happen is people will start to think, oh, they just hired her because she's a female. But I don't know. I'm a bit like Ani. I sit on the fence around this because I think you shouldn't be hiring people based on the fact that she ticks the box because she's a woman, and she went to a average university, not just an Ivy League or top UK university. So that's diversity. We'll take her. You should just be doing it because the person is right for the job. They're good. They're going to bring something fresh and new to the business.
Yeah, I mean, on the ethical point, I would have to say I think quotas do make sense because I think we do envisage a long future for humanity, and not perhaps as long as it could have been had we been more sensible with regards to the climate, perhaps, but at least long enough to introduce gender equality, I would hope. And so therefore, I think longevity does have to be the view that we have with regards to ethics, and therefore, when we reach a situation where we can say, okay, now we have attained a level of equality, then there is no issue of quotas. Then the man will never have to miss out and say, oh, I didn't get it because I'm a man and I was coming up against a woman. I mean, the other side of that is, for the last, I don't know how many thousands of years, every woman has lost out because there was a man applying.
To be honest, I agree with you, Sako, in the fact that I think we're talking from the benefit of a society that is quite not where it should be, but still quite advanced if you compare to other societies in other countries in terms of where we're at from an equality point of view. If we were in a society that was only just opening up, then a quota would most definitely be something that helps, because there isn't again that education, there isn't that kind of open-mindedness to kind of think like that. And then having a quota system will force people to get to where we are now here, I would say. So I think it's we're privileged, if you like, in that this has already happened before us, and we're benefiting from all the work that's happened before us, and we can actually have this conversation being like, actually we're in a good position. But had this quotas not existed like for the last 20 years, maybe we wouldn't be in this position.
Yeah. Sorry, Tatiana. Yeah.
No. I was gonna say. I mean, a lot of businesses now set targets, right? They say to the leadership team, you will get X amount of money if you hire X amount of women into your team. So there are, it's not even quotas anymore. It's financial incentives to encourage people.
Yeah, I mean, but that tells you that society hasn't reached the levels that it should have done, and that we are behind. And I take Ani's point completely. That we live in a society which, the fact that we're having this conversation would suggest that a certain level of education has come through, which tells us we should be considering very seriously considering this situation. But other societies, there is no such conversation. It's not even on the agenda. And so I completely take that on board. I am, Keir Starmer hasn't actually said or done very much as Labour leader to make me feel that there is a viable opposition at the moment in the UK. However, on this point, he did say it's not enough now for men to simply be silent supporters of gender equality. It's time that men actually participate, that they are vocal, that they are fully supportive of these kinds of policies. It's just not enough, to remain quietly supportive as men. It also involves us. And on this particular point, I thought that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to push these kinds of agendas forward. And that's the one thing that he has said, which I completely agree with. You're not convinced?
Oh, sorry. I'll say I'm not convinced with Starmer.
Okay, well, neither am I. But that was nice what he said, at least.
I agree with what he's saying on that front, though, completely.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Do you expect to see more support from male colleagues and male friends? Do you expect them to be more vocal? Do you expect them to come and demonstrate alongside you?
I do, but I don't see it. Maybe again, it might be. Ani might be walking on strawberry fields compared to me. It sounds like when it comes to the kind of allies that she has, because I don't know. Maybe it's just my luck, but I don't really. I've seen a handful of male colleagues, stand up for other women in the office, but I just generally I don't see it. I don't see that. I don't see that allyship. doesn't exist, at least in many of the companies I've worked for.
Ani?
I'm trying to think. But more not so much necessarily in the workplace, but in general. I'm not actually necessarily sure they would come out and demonstrate in the street for it. They will have the conversation. If we start the conversation, they'll go, yeah, I agree, or you're right, that shouldn't be like this. But I don't necessarily see the men I know kind of taking up that mantle and going like, right, actually, I'm gonna join you in this, and go and support this with you. To be honest, I think it's more of a bit more of a passive kind of type of support, if you like.
Yeah, I find that a shame, really, because I'm not black, but I believe Black Lives Matter, and I'm not a woman, and I believe in gender equality, and I think that this should be the sense of humanity, that we should be able to empathize and understand with the people who have been marginalized, who have been treated unfairly. And it should be incumbent upon those other elements of society who do not feel the danger that they feel walking down the street. Yeah. And they should reach out and hold them, embrace them, and accompany them forward. I think that's the way humanity should be. And it's the way we are at the moment as a society is not enough.
I agree. I think that's fair. I'd expect. I think if I was to say to you, Sako, I'm going to this march, right, women's march, and actually that's a good point. The women's march that Ani and I went to back during Trump's inauguration in 2000 was it January 2017, Ani? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So our friend Rafi came along. No other guy would come. Like Rafi's like the perfect example of a person who would always support you and he's always about seeking truth and justice and so on. But there aren't many people like him out there, frankly. If I told some of my other guy friends, they'd been like, oh, what, with a bunch of women? No, thanks.
Yeah. Who else do you expect to find on a women's march?
Nobody likes angry women. That's the truth. Okay, you all like us when we're drunk and cheery and oh my gosh, flip hair, but not when we're angry.
I don't have a problem with angry women as long as they're not angry with me. It's not an issue. I was in Berlin at the time. Otherwise, I would have accompanied you. However, then, yeah. Okay, all right. I think we should probably leave it there, actually, purely because we've already surpassed an hour and 14 minutes. And I think most men would have fallen asleep after the 45th minute, which is when we actually started talking about this stuff. So therefore, I'm going to have to rearrange everything, aren't I? Ani, Tatiana, what can I say? Thank you very much. I hope actually you'll both come back and we can have another three-way chat, because it is actually very entertaining to hear, not only your responses to my suggestions and my questions, but also you bounce off one another so well. I don't even have to do anything. I just, turn that dial, as it were, and just let you go. That's cool.
Well, I love hanging out. Well, I love even distantly hanging out with Ani. So thank you for this, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm pleased to hear that in some workspaces or industries that there's a lot more, there's a lot more sort of forward thinking going on.
No, to be honest, I've always thought I was quite lucky on that front. But yeah, and like the same goes, like it's always, actually really good fun to chat to you both. And I really hope that one day we can actually get to do this face to face again.
God, absolutely. I'm looking forward to a nice cold pint along the Thames in a Richmond pub, and we can all have this chat together with a few other friends as well. So hopefully that will happen this year, if not next year, but it's going to happen, I think.
Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sako, for this, and I look forward to listening to it.
Good. I'll make sure I get it done really soon.
All right.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye.